After a long journey through 5 chapters and up to 105 bosses, depending on how many of the optional ones you took on, your final challenge stands before you. The Stone Monkey, and then, after you overcome him, the Great Sage's Broken Shell. And to be honest with you, these fights couldn't be more different. The Stone Monkey is slow and powerful with lots of AoEs, whereas the Great Sage, well, he's Wukong. And as the Destined One, you're also Wukong. That's what your entire journey's been about. So expect him to use a lot of the same tricks that you have at your disposal. And so today, I'm going to go over both the fights. At this point, I've done them quite a few times between the regular game and New Game Plus, break down some of the most important moves and how to counter them, give some general tips and tricks, then finish everything up by highlighting some of the fights and how they went for me. As a note, if you're struggling on these fights and you want a really OP transformation, then I strongly recommend that you take on Erlang Shen, the Sacred Divinity, which is the game's secret end boss. Beating him gives you the Azure Dome, which lets you take the Stone Monkey's form. And so speaking of, let's start with the Stone Monkey. He has 2 phases, Phase 1 and Phase 2. In Phase 1, he only uses ice attacks. In Phase 2, he uses both ice and fire attacks. Again, if you've already done the Erlang fight, you'll find this to be a little bit familiar from your own experiences. Now, the Stone Monkey's attacks are pretty simple, pretty easy to dodge, and pretty slow. But he has a variety of special moves, most of which have a shockwave component. So for example, he likes to open a fight by just pounding the ground, releasing multiple shockwaves. Dodge through them, or jump over them. Alternatively, if you're in pillar stance, you can just hop up on the top of your staff and completely negate the mechanic. Now, something that you might have noticed is a little bit of a pattern with these later bosses. They like to counter your heavy attacks. So, if you try to use a heavy attack on the Stone Monkey, there's a good chance that he disappears, then shortly after appears with a counter punch. Now, there is a cooldown on this, meaning if he recently disappeared, he's probably not going to do it back to back, and you're pretty safe to heavy attack. That said, the varied combos for the different stances are incredibly powerful, so this is the perfect fight to capitalize on those. If you want to know more, I'll link to a guide down below that goes over the stances and what their various combos do. But since it feels really bad to lose 4 focus points to this, either A, bait it out with a lesser charged heavy attack, or B, simply don't use it unless he's crowd controlled. Oh, and by the way, if you do trigger this, you can dodge the counterpunch by observing the water to see where he's going to appear from. Now, he also likes to do a double AoE move, where he creates a small ring of ice that will chill around him. It explodes after a short duration, then it explodes a second time in a wider ring after a short duration. There's a couple ways you can dodge this. Number 1, be outside the circle, then inside the circle. Number 2, just time your dodge to avoid damage and prevent yourself from being frozen. Then last up, he has Stone Form. I know he's the Stone Monkey, but yes, he can use Rock Hard, which deflects your attack, and allows him to use a counter punch that leads into a grab. If you can, just stop attacking, that way you don't risk the grab at all. But if you do happen to accidentally hit him, something that's pretty easy to do since, he's literally a rock anyway, so seeing a rock turn to stone's kind of difficult to tell. But honestly, Phase 1's really simple. I don't think that's where you're going to struggle. Phase 2, after he reaches 0% health, is where he becomes empowered with fire. And this is where the fight gets significantly more difficult, especially at a couple key moments. For a lot of his basic moves, in addition to causing some icy bursts, now he causes fiery explosions. And if you remember the rings of ice that emanated out towards the start of a fight at Phase 1, well, he now has a fire version of that, where several rings of fire emanate out. Again, you can get away from the boss, hop up on your staff, dodge through the rings, whatever you need to do to avoid damage. He will also use a jumping attack, and this is much more dangerous than the versions he uses in ice form, because now he jumps, and when he lands, a shockwave expands outwards, that will hit you pretty much no matter where you're standing, unless again you hop up onto your staff, or dodge through a ring. You may have noticed Pillar Stance is a pretty darn effective counter for this guy if you're comfortable using it. Like with before, he does ground pounds that do AoE explosions. Usually these are followed by a bigger explosion or final aftershock after delay, so if you see him stop attacking, don't immediately run back in. There's both an ice version and a fire version, and I'm pretty darn sure that he can use the ice version in Phase 1 as well. Now to continue with a fiery theme, in Phase 2, he can disappear, again if you use a heavy attack, but sometimes he also just uses it throughout the course of a fight, leaving behind a decoy that either crumbles to ice or disappears in a little bit of smoke and fire. When he returns, he either does the icy shockwave or the far more dangerous version when he picks fire, The stone monkey fades away and a ring of fire expands outwards. But instead of a second ring of fire exploding from his location, now that ring of fire that expanded outwards when it reaches the edge of the arena collapses inwards. So we have to dodge it, but it's moving in the opposite direction because the shockwave is very much going to return and it is fully capable of dealing significant damage. At about 60% health, he uses a Pluck of Many and summons a clone of himself. You can either kill it or ignore it and focus on the real boss, which will always have the lower health bar of the two. Personally, I found it was easier to focus the clone, that way I don't have to deal with it and I can go back to burning the boss. That said, if you do just ignore the clone, it will eventually time out and dissipate. Then the last move that I wanted to highlight here is his jump attack. Because now he's not just going to jump and do fire or jump and do ice, he's going to jump, attack with ice, which is really bad because it can freeze you in place, then fire, and then cause a secondary aftershock, which is also fire. So in terms of tips, tricks, and general strategy, I found that the Stone Monkey was very, very, very weak to the Plantain Fan. It would just CC him for a really long time and allow him to get in tons of free damage. So I pretty much used that on cooldown. Now, I was not using the Golden Radiance set, for one that gives you ki every time you score a crit. I was using the Full Heavens Equal set just because it was the cool new toy and I wanted to use the Wukong stance. Honestly, it wasn't a very strategic or tactical decision. It was just I wanted to use the cool thing decision. It did end up working out pretty well for me, as I found that in general, it wasn't too difficult to beat the Stone Monkey using this stance. Though I do think overall Pillar stance would have probably been a little bit more effective. Beyond that, the only thing that I found to be particularly problematic was when I was getting frozen. That leaves you very, very vulnerable, and you need to take some time to break out. Now, you can just play it safe, dodge the ice moves, and get far away from the boss, but if you don't happen to do that, then the next best thing is just mash your dodge button to get unfrozen as quickly as possible and just deal with a penalty. Since a lot of the time he would do the freeze move as part of another sequence, there is additional damage that's happening. If it's the ice move, it's not too bad, as most of the damage happens the second time in an outer ring, but if it's the ice into fire move, that's pretty bad, as you're likely to eat a fiery shockwave. With that said, here's how the Stone Monkey fight went for me. Alright, with the penultimate boss down, it's time to fight the Great Sage himself. Or at the very least, the hollow husk that remains of him. Now, like with the Stone Monkey, the Great Sage's broken shell is very vulnerable to the Plantain Fan, so you should very much use it throughout the course of a fight. But also, his moveset is your moves. He uses Thrust Stance, he uses Pillar Stance, and he uses Smash Stance. He also, of course, uses Sage Stance. He has Staff Spin. There are a few fun things that he can use, which sadly the Destined One never got access to, but in general, expect him to use everything that you are capable of. The only thing that he can't use in this case is his transformation, the Stone Monkey, because you kind of already killed that twice. Now personally, I found the easiest way to deal with him was Smash Stance. This is because the Smash Stance varied combo has a counterattack. It's a 2-part varied combo, which you can use to negate multiple attacks. Again, this is a 2-phase fight, and be very careful because he is most dangerous in phase 2, which, you guessed it, starts when his health reaches 0. And yes, he does full heal. So now let's get into some of his more notable and dangerous moves, starting with phase 1, then moving on to phase 2. First up, his perfect dodge. He dodges up to 2 times, leaving behind a clone that explodes. Unfortunately, this does mean it's very hard to land blows on the Great Sage, because so often you'll go in to hit him, because he just dodges, then dodges again, and appears a short distance away while throwing his staff at you, and of course, laughing maniacally the entire way. Next up, he uses Ring of Fire, and this one's actually really good for you because you can stand in it to generate yourself focus. Turns out one little side effect of you being Wukong, Wukong being you, is you can power yourself up using his spells, which I thought was a really cool and neat little touch. The only downside here is, while standing within the ring, he gains a damage reduction buff. Now, as a note, this Ring of Fire does not seem to heal the boss, so it's not too dangerous when he casts it, and it doesn't matter too much if you let him stand in it, especially since you're gaining significant benefits as well. Just don't be super confident about unleashing those charged heavy attacks because, you guessed it, like the Stone Monkey, he loves to counter those. Now, there are 2 more things to watch out for. The first is his Pluck of Many. Luckily, each clone only does 1 attack, but it's still an unrelenting barrage of strikes that you have to deal with, otherwise you're going to take massive damage. Because there's one thing that's very true about this guy, he hits really, really hard. Also, he will occasionally hop up onto his staff, Pillar Stance style, where he unleashes a barrage of staves at you. They're a fun little range attack that you can deflect with your staff spin before he jumps down to unleash a final attack. You can deal with this in a very similar manner to dealing with the special Sword Storm move that Erlang Shen does. And that's about it for his moveset in phase 1. There's one last move that he may be able to use in phase 1, but I never actually got him to do it. Instead, he was only using it in phase 2, so I'm not 100% sure, and that is his deflect counter. He turns himself to stone, and then does a counterattack grab if you both attack him to trigger the counterattack, and then fail to dodge it. But again, I'm not 100% sure there, since for me, he only did that in phase 2. If he does it to you in phase 1, don't be super shocked. But also you can deal with it exactly the same way you dealt with the Stone Monkey's version. So after he reaches 0% health, the Great Sage's broken shell fully heals himself and empowers himself using your relics. He is reabsorbing Wukong's power. And this is where he gets much more aggressive and much more dangerous. Because, for example, now he's going to start casting Immobilize, which is exactly as obnoxious as you'd think, because your main defense against it is Cloud Step, which costs mana and has a cooldown. Or sometimes, if you're lucky, he goes into this fun little standoff where he doesn't hit you, just looks very menacing while you're frozen in place. He doesn't use this too frequently, but there are several other things over the course of a fight that you might want to use Cloud Step on. So basically this is yet another reason to not use your Cloud Step frivolously, and really only use it when you need to. Also, as his health gets lower, he uses a Cloud Strike move. No, this isn't Cloud Strike where he creates a decoy and then jumps back the way you have. This is literal Cloud Strike where he hops on the Somersault Cloud and jumps down to strike you. That combo is particularly damaging, so do your best to avoid it. Now, one last thing that I found equal parts infuriating and cool. When you get the Great Sage's broken shell to low health in phase 2, if you take a drink from your gourd, he will actually immobilize you, steal your gourd, and take a swig for himself. You can avoid this by going into Cloud Step, or otherwise waiting until he's busy attacking you using some sort of other long animation and can't cast Immobilize before you heal. But also, you can just let it happen and watch the cutscene, because it is pretty darn cool. The boss will get a little healing from this, but it's not like he heals for 60% of his health or anything, so as long as you're playing well, it shouldn't be catastrophic. Though with that said, in general, it's probably better to just watch the cutscene on YouTube, and instead avoid letting him do this move. So that said, there's a couple routes that I found to be particularly effective. First up, since the boss was very cagey and evasive, I would very often let him come to me, then counterattack using the smash stance varied combos. Also, because he hits very, very, very hard, it is absolutely not worth it to be greedy. There's 2 phases of a fight. Yes, you can pretty much blow away the first phase if you use the Plantain Fan, but in general, if the question is, do I hit the boss and also take a hit, or dodge the boss and not get hit, the correct answer is always dodge the boss and don't risk the hit. This is especially the case if you're using the Gilded Radiance set, because you can keep recharging the Plantain Fan and doing all of your bursts of damage when he's completely incapacitated. That is the one time that he won't dodge away and be super obnoxious. Now with that said, I'm going to break from tradition slightly here, and instead of showing you the first time that I fought the Great Sage's Broken Shell, I'm actually going to show the first time for Phase 1, just to give you a little idea of how much you can trivialize the fight with a Plantain Fan, but then the second phase from my Spellbinder run. Since Spellbinder really forces you to get good, learn the boss's pattern, and not rely on cheesy tricks. I mean, unless you count the varied combo as a cheesy trick, because it does give iframes. And so with that, good luck against the Stone Monkey and the Great Sage's Broken Shell. If you want a few more Black Myth Wukong guides, I'll leave some relevant ones up in the card and down below, or you can go look over at Maxwell GG, where we have a variety of guides on most of the bosses, quests, and game systems. But also, if you like playing games and learning how to get better at them, then do be sure to get subscribed and maybe leave a like while you're down there. If you haven't done the secret boss, or if you have any unfinished business, something that you'd like to go complete, a boss that you might have missed, well, unfortunately, there are a few things that do get locked out that you can only do while you're there in the moment. But there's also a ton of stuff, including the main secret areas, that don't actually get locked out. So take this time before you go into New Game Plus, wrap up any unfinished business. And so with that, your journey is about to come to an end, and so is this video. So thank you very much to everyone who watched to the end. I'm glad you enjoyed. I've had a ton of fun playing Black Myth Wukong, so much so that I didn't beat it once, I didn't beat it twice, I beat it 3 times, and I even platinumed the game. And I'm very much looking forward to the DLC. I'm not sure when that's coming, but if rumors are to be believed, there's going to be not 1 but 2 total DLC, so I very much look forward to playing those. I'm sure I'll make some videos on them, and so I hope to see you again at some point in the future.